Black student refuses to give up seat. What happens next shocks everyone on board. The airplane cabin buzzed with the usual sounds of engines and quiet conversations. Passengers settled into their seats, some eager to escape the world below, others anxious about the journey ahead. Amid this ordinary atmosphere, a sudden sharp voice shattered the calm. A well-dressed woman stood firmly in the aisle, her eyes fixed on a young black girl sitting by the window. She was holding the hand of a small child, no older than 3 years old. Her tone was unyielding as she demanded that the girl give up her seat. The girl. Amira looked up slowly, her face calm but resolute. She gripped the armrests tightly, knowing this moment was more than a simple disagreement over a seat. It was about respect, dignity, and standing her ground against a world that often tried to make her invisible. The woman insisted her daughter needed the seat and that Amira had no right to be there. Passengers around them turned their heads, sensing the tension rising. Some shifted uncomfortably, others watched with curiosity and concern. The atmosphere grew thick with anticipation as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Amira's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. She explained this was her assigned seat and she would not move. This simple act of courage sent ripples through the cabin. The flight attendant approached, eyes sharp and measured. She checked the seating chart and confirmed Amira's claim. The woman's expression hardened. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by a young girl, but the flight attendant stood firm, insisting that if the little girl needed accommodations, those should have been arranged before boarding. The seat belonged to Amira. Whispers spread through the cabin as the confrontation deepened. The woman's anger grew louder while Amira remained composed, embodying quiet strength. This was no longer just a dispute over a seat. It was a moment that exposed deeper issues of privilege, fairness, and justice. The scene captured the attention of every passenger. Some sympathized with Amira's bravery, others were uncomfortable with the growing conflict. No one expected this quiet flight to become the stage for a powerful lesson about standing up for what is right. In that small window seat, Amira held more than just a place to watch the clouds. She held her dignity, her dreams, and the will to be seen and heard. This was only the beginning of a story that would challenge assumptions, inspire courage, and leave an impact far beyond the cabin walls. The flight attendant stood silently for a moment, weighing the tension in the cabin, like a scale tipped heavily by the voices around her. Her eyes met Amira's, steady and reassuring. She had seen moments like this before, moments when the rules were tested and when courage was quietly demanded. The woman with the child's voice rose again, sharp and accusing, claiming she was a loyal customer who deserved special treatment. She spoke of status and privilege as if that alone should bend the rules. Yet the flight attendant did not flinch. She explained patiently but firmly that seating assignments were clear and that no passenger, no matter how wealthy or influential, could claim another's seat without proper arrangements made in advance. Around them, the cabin hummed with whispers, some passengers shifting uneasily, others nodding in silent approval. The power dynamics in the room were palpable, an older woman wielding her entitlement versus a young student holding on to her rightful place. The flight attendant's calm but unyielding stance began to tip the balance. Amira's hands trembled slightly, but her voice never wavered. She shared quietly how this flight was more than a trip. It was a milestone, the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and hope. She was on her way to a prestigious internship, the first in her family, to reach this stage, a future unfolding before her eyes like the clouds outside her window. The small child clung to her mother, sensing the tension but not fully understanding. The mother's frustration grew, muttering threats about complaints and consequences. Yet the flight attendant simply shook her head, refusing to be intimidated. This was about fairness, about respect for every passenger's right to be treated with dignity. Suddenly, the woman's expression shifted. The fight seemed less about the seat and more about control. But the flight attendant knew that siding with Amira was the right thing to do. She had made a choice that would echo far beyond the confines of this plane. As the minutes passed, murmurs turned into conversations, and conversations into whispers of admiration for the young student's courage and the attendant's integrity. The cabin was no longer just a space for travel. It had become a battleground for justice and human decency. Amira looked around, catching the eyes of strangers who silently gave her strength. The fight was far from over, but she no longer felt alone. The flight attendant's quiet support was a lifeline, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up can change the course of everything. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. What began as a simple dispute over a seat had blossomed into something much larger. Passengers who had once avoided eye contact were now watching closely their expressions, a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and some discomfort. Amira felt the weight of every gaze, but instead of shrinking, she found an unexpected strength. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the quiet affirmation that her stand mattered. This was no longer just about her seat. It was about claiming space in a world that often tried to deny her and others like her. Nearby, a man in business attire whispered to his wife, shaking his head at the woman's arrogance. A teenage boy glanced up from his phone, visibly impressed by Amira's composure. Even the older couple a few rows back exchanged knowing looks, as if recalling their own battles for dignity. Meanwhile, the woman with the child grew increasingly frustrated. She huffed and paced in the aisle, demanding the flight attendant do more. But the attendant remained firm, repeating the airline's policies and emphasizing that no one could be forced to move from their assigned seat. Suddenly, the flight attendant's tablet beeped softly, a message from the captain. There was a note about the ongoing situation and a reminder that all crew must maintain professionalism and ensure passenger safety. The flight attendant's eyes flicked briefly to Amira, a silent encouragement to hold on. She could see the toll this confrontation was taking on the young student. The pressure was mounting, but Amira's resolve only deepened. Behind the scenes, whispers of discontent began to ripple. Some passengers whispered about privilege and fairness. Others quietly applauded the attendant's courage to uphold the rules in the face of entitled demands. In that moment, the cabin was a microcosm of the world outside, where lines of power, prejudice, and justice intersected, and where individuals could either choose to perpetuate inequality or stand up to it. As the plane cruised steadily above the clouds, the flight attendant made a decision. This was more than a routine flight now. It was a chance to send a message, a statement that dignity and respect are not negotiable. Amira sat, tall eyes fixed on the window, but heart anchored in the truth she was living. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would no longer be invisible. The hum of the engines was steady, but tension simmered in the cabin like a storm ready to break. The woman's protests had quieted, but the air still crackled with unease. Passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging furtive glances, wondering what would happen next. Amira sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap, but inside she was anything but calm. She replayed the confrontation over and over in her mind, the woman's entitlement, the flight attendant's firm but respectful defense. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was standing her ground worth the attention? Would this ripple through her life beyond this flight? Then the flight attendant approached her again, kneeling beside her seat. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "You're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Amira met her eyes and felt a surge of gratitude. It was more than just the words. It was the support, the recognition that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Suddenly, a ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin. The woman's voice rose again, louder this time, demanding the crew reconsider. Some passengers sighed, others murmured their displeasure. The division in the cabin became palpable, but then something unexpected happened. A man in the row ahead stood up, clearing his throat to get attention. He was middle-aged, dressed casually, but there was a quiet authority in his voice. "Let's remember why we're here. Everyone deserves respect. Rules are rules. His words resonated, and slowly more passengers nodded or voiced agreement. The woman's face flushed with frustration, but she no longer had the clear support she'd expected. Amira watched this unfold with a mix of relief and surprise. The support was growing. She wasn't alone. The flight attendant returned to her position, calm and composed. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker, reminding passengers to remain seated and assuring them the crew was handling the situation. As the plane continued its journey, the incident became more than just a seating dispute. It became a quiet battle of dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right. Amira looked out the window again, clouds stretching endlessly before her. For the first time, she felt the future wasn't something to be feared, but something to be claimed. As the plane soared above the clouds, Amira's thoughts drifted far beyond the cramped cabin. This moment, this confrontation, was not just about a seat or a flight. It was a reflection of something much deeper. She thought about her parents who had worked tirelessly to give her opportunities they never had. She thought about the countless stories of injustice they had shared around the dinner table, stories that had shaped her quietly determined spirit. Her mind wandered back to the early days of her education, where she often felt like an outsider watched through a lens of stereotypes and assumptions. How many times had she swallowed her pride just to avoid confrontation? How many times had she been told to be polite or quiet when she faced unfairness? But today was different. Today she had spoken up, not out of anger, but out of a quiet insistence on being seen and respected. The flight attendant, meanwhile, returned to her duties, but kept glancing Amira's way, a subtle gesture of solidarity. This woman wasn't just enforcing rules, she was standing up for dignity. Meanwhile, the woman demanding the seat sat back with a scowl, clearly unsettled by the shifting mood in the cabin. Around her, other passengers whispered, some shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. As the flight progressed, Amira felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Standing firm in the face of entitlement was draining, but it was also empowering. In that moment, she realized the true weight of what she had done. It was more than a small victory on a plane, it was a stand against a lifetime of invisibility. And as the plane edged closer to its destination, Amira resolved silently to carry that strength forward, wherever life would take her next. The cabin settled into a cautious calm, but beneath the surface, the ripple effects of the confrontation were growing stronger. Passengers whispered amongst themselves, some offering nods of encouragement to Amira, others casting uneasy glances toward the woman who had caused the commotion. Amira noticed a few people discreetly leaning over to her, offering quiet words of support. A middle-aged man near the back smiled warmly and gave a thumbs up. A young woman across the aisle mouthed, "You're brave." The solidarity was unexpected but deeply comforting. The flight attendant, whose name Amira learned was Carla, approached once again, this time with a small smile. "You handled that incredibly well. If you ever need anything during the flight, just let me know." Amira nodded, grateful for the kindness amid the tension. Carla's support wasn't just professional, it felt personal, as if she understood the significance of the moment. Meanwhile, the woman with her child, now quieter but still visibly upset, began to tap furiously on her phone. Amira guessed she was already drafting complaints or calls to the airline's customer service. But the tide was turning. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted. Suddenly, a voice came over the PA system. "This is Captain Harris. We thank you for your patience during this situation. We ask all passengers to respect one another and enjoy the rest of the flight." It was a simple announcement, but to Amira, it sounded like a powerful statement, an official reminder that respect wasn't optional. As the flight progressed, Amira found herself reflecting on how unexpected allies could emerge in the most unlikely places. In a moment when she had felt vulnerable and isolated, the kindness of strangers had reminded her that she was not alone. By the time the plane began its descent, the woman's earlier demands felt like a distant echo, overshadowed by a collective quiet affirmation: everyone deserves dignity. The plane touched down smoothly, and as the seatbelt signs flickered off, a wave of mixed emotions settled over the cabin. Amira gathered her belongings slowly, her heart still pounding from the earlier confrontation. She had stood her ground, but the tension lingered like a shadow. As she moved towards the exit, whispers followed her like a subtle soundtrack. Some voices were supportive, others skeptical, and a few filled with judgment. Amira kept her head high, knowing that this moment was bigger than just a seat on a plane. At the gate, she caught sight of the woman from before, now engaged in a heated conversation with a ground staff member. The woman's voice was sharp and indignant, her complaints loud enough for many to hear, but Amira didn't look back. She stepped outside the airport noise washing over her and breathed deeply. This was more than just a flight. It was a milestone, a test of courage and conviction. Outside, her phone buzzed. Messages of support from friends and strangers flooded in. Some shared stories of their own struggles, others simply sent words of encouragement. Amira smiled softly, the weight on her shoulders easing slightly. That night, as she prepared for the internship that had seemed so far away just hours before, Amira realized something profound. Standing up for herself hadn't just been about a seat. It had been about claiming her right to belong, to dream, and to be seen. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Amira was ready to face whatever came next, armed with a newfound strength that no one could take away. While Amira was stepping into a new chapter of her life, the ripple effect of the incident was just beginning. Back inside the plane, the flight attendant Jessica sat quietly in the crew lounge, reflecting on what had happened. The confrontation had shaken everyone on board, but Jessica felt a deep sense of responsibility and pride. She knew that standing up for Amira wasn't just a moment of courage. It was a stand against the subtle but persistent currents of privilege and entitlement that sometimes went unchecked. But Jessica also understood the risks. Complaints had already started coming in from some passengers, and she worried about potential backlash from her superiors. Meanwhile, the woman who had demanded Amira's seat was making calls, her voice laced with frustration and disbelief. To her, this was not just a disagreement, it was a personal slight. She expected to get her way and was determined to use every tool at her disposal to make sure she was heard. Back in the cockpit, the captain exchanged concerned glances with the first officer. They had witnessed the escalating tension and knew this was more than just a passenger dispute. It was a situation that could impact the airline's reputation and even the morale of the crew. As the plane emptied and the cabin crew prepared for their next flight, Jessica made a quiet promise to herself. She would not let this moment fade into silence. She would fight for fairness, for respect, and for passengers like Amira, who deserved to be treated with dignity. Little did she know the events on this flight were about to ignite a larger conversation, one that would reach far beyond the walls of the airplane and challenge a whole industry to rethink its values. As the plane touched down, a wave of whispers and stares followed Amira through the airport terminal. She could feel the weight of every eye, every judgment. Yet something inside her was different now, stronger, more determined. This wasn't just a fight over a seat. It was a declaration that she belonged and would no longer be invisible. Meanwhile, news of the confrontation had already started circulating. Passengers who witnessed the incident shared their versions on social media, sparking a heated debate about entitlement, privilege, and respect. The airline's customer service hotline was inundated with calls, some condemning the flight attendant for refusing the woman's demand, others praising her for standing up for Amira. Back at the airline's headquarters, executives gathered in emergency meetings. They faced a dilemma: how to respond to the viral controversy without alienating their customer base or appearing indifferent to issues of racial discrimination. Public relations teams crafted carefully worded statements, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Jessica, the flight attendant, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Colleagues offered quiet support, but rumors of possible disciplinary actions loomed. She grappled with anxiety, wondering if standing up for what was right might cost her job. Amira, on the other hand, found unexpected encouragement from strangers and friends alike. Messages flooded in commending her courage and resilience. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a symbol, a rallying point for many who had felt marginalized. Amidst the chaos, Amira knew one thing for sure: her journey was only beginning. And whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. In the days following the flight, Amira's story exploded across social media platforms. Hashtags demanding respect and justice trended nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing passengers and experts about the larger implications of the incident. It wasn't just about a seat anymore, it was about the systemic inequalities embedded in everyday interactions. Amira was invited to speak at community forums and university panels, sharing her experience and inspiring others to stand firm against discrimination. Each speech deepened her conviction that her voice mattered, that her presence challenged outdated norms. Meanwhile, Pacific Horizon Airlines faced mounting pressure. Protests were organized outside their offices, demanding policy changes and accountability. The CEO issued a formal apology, promising diversity training for staff and a review of their customer service protocols. But many remained skeptical, wondering if these actions were sincere or merely damage control. Jessica, the flight attendant, received an overwhelming outpouring of support from advocacy groups and the public. Fundraisers were set up to protect her job and recognize her bravery. Despite the attention, she remained humble, focused on the belief that doing what is right transcends personal risk. For Amira, the experience became a defining moment, a catalyst that fueled her ambitions beyond the flight. She began volunteering with organizations that fought racial injustice, determined to transform her painful encounter into a force for change. The incident was no longer confined to one airplane or one city. It had ignited a conversation about respect, dignity, and equality that reverberated across the country, touching hearts and awakening minds. Despite the growing support and attention, Amira soon realized that the path ahead would not be easy. As she returned to her daily life, subtle but persistent challenges awaited her. At college, some peers whispered, some looked at her differently, and not all faculty members were as supportive as she had hoped. The incident on the plane had made her a symbol, but also a target. Yet with every obstacle, Amira grew more resilient. She found strength in the community that rallied behind her, from friends to activists to strangers who had been inspired by her courage. They encouraged her to keep speaking out, to use her platform not only to share her story, but also to amplify others who had faced similar injustices. Jessica, too, faced her own struggles. Though praised publicly, she felt the weight of backlash within her workplace. Some colleagues resented the attention and the changes that were slowly being implemented, but she refused to be silenced or discouraged. Every supportive message reminded her why she had acted that day. Together, Amira and Jessica began to collaborate on projects advocating for fairness and respect in public spaces, from airports to schools to workplaces. They were no longer just individuals caught in a moment. They were leaders driving a movement. The battles they faced now were bigger than a seat on a plane. They were fighting for systemic change, for a world where no one would have to question if they belong. News of Amira's stand on the plane had spread far beyond the airport terminal. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting her courage and condemning the woman's entitlement. Videos of the confrontation were shared thousands of times, sparking heated discussions about privilege, race, and respect. But the impact went deeper than online debates. Amira received messages from people across the country: students, parents, teachers, airline staff, all sharing their own stories of discrimination, or moments when they wished someone had stood up for them. Schools began holding workshops about diversity and inclusion, inspired by Amira's story. Airlines reviewed and improved their policies to protect passengers from harassment and discrimination. Activists and community leaders reached out to Amira, inviting her to speak at events and join panels on social justice. Amira felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. What started as a simple act of refusing to move had turned into a catalyst for change. She realized that her voice had power not just for herself, but for many others who had been silenced for too long. Jessica, watching from behind the scenes, saw the transformation as well. What had begun as a tense moment on a flight was now a movement with real momentum. Together they knew they had started something that could not be undone. As Amira prepared for her first public speaking engagement, she looked back on that day, the fear, the doubt, and the unexpected bravery, and she knew this was only the beginning. As Amira's story gained widespread attention, not everyone was ready to celebrate her courage. Alongside the waves of support came harsh criticism and backlash. Some accused her of overreacting, of causing unnecessary drama on a simple flight. Others questioned her motives, trying to undermine her integrity and paint her as confrontational. The woman who had demanded the seat, emboldened by the backlash, filed a formal complaint against Amira, alleging disruptive behavior and demanding compensation for what she called emotional distress. The airline found itself caught in the middle, pressured by both sides and wary of public relations fallout. Amira felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her. Messages turned from encouraging to hateful, some laced with racism and threats. It was a brutal reminder that standing up for what is right often invites resistance. Her confidence wavered, but she refused to let fear silence her. Jessica stood firmly by her side, helping Amira navigate media interviews and legal challenges. They both understood that this fight was bigger than just a seating dispute. It was about challenging systemic attitudes and standing tall in the face of adversity. Amira began attending community meetings and legal briefings, determined to defend her truth. She found unexpected strength in the solidarity of others who had faced similar battles. Together, they were building a movement fueled by resilience and hope. The road ahead was difficult, but Amira knew that every challenge only sharpened her resolve. She was no longer just a young student on a plane. She had become a symbol of courage, and she intended to keep fighting for dignity and justice, no matter the cost. Just when the pressure seemed unbearable, an unexpected ally emerged. A prominent civil rights attorney named Marcus Taylor reached out to Amira. Known for his fierce advocacy and history of winning high-profile cases against discrimination, Marcus offered to take on her case pro bono. Meeting Marcus brought a new wave of hope. He listened carefully as Amira recounted every detail of the flight, the confrontation, and the aftermath. His calm confidence and strategic mind reassured her that she wasn't alone in this battle. Marcus immediately began preparing a legal strategy focusing on the systemic issues revealed by Amira's experience. They worked together to gather evidence, testimonies from other passengers, and support from advocacy groups. The case soon gained media attention again, this time framed around a broader fight for civil rights and fair treatment. Meanwhile, the airline started to feel the pressure. Executives reached out to Marcus hoping to negotiate quietly. But Marcus insisted on transparency and accountability, determined to use this case to set a precedent. Amira continued her studies, but now balanced them with activism and legal preparation. Her transformation from a shy student to a confident advocate inspired those around her. Friends, family, and supporters rallied, turning her story into a beacon for change. As the courtroom date approached, tension built, but Amira felt ready. With Marcus's guidance and the strength she had found within herself, she was prepared to face whatever came next. This was more than a lawsuit. It was a fight for justice that could impact countless others. The courtroom was packed. Media advocates and supporters filled every seat, eager to witness a landmark case. Amira sat quietly beside Marcus Taylor, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. The airline's legal team presented their defense, downplaying the incident as an isolated misunderstanding, a simple seating dispute blown out of proportion. But Marcus dismantled their arguments with precision. He presented clear evidence of systemic discrimination supported by passenger testimonies, and the airline's own internal emails that revealed biases in seating policies and staff training. Amira's calm and honest testimony resonated deeply with everyone present. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the industry. The airline was found guilty of racial discrimination and ordered to implement immediate policy reforms, provide compensation to Amira, and fund diversity and inclusion programs. The courtroom erupted with applause. Amira's victory was not just personal, it was historic. She had stood up against injustice and won, proving that courage and truth could break down barriers. In the weeks that followed, Amira became a voice for change. She spoke at conferences, inspired other young activists, and worked closely with Marcus to push for broader civil rights protections nationwide. The airline's transformation served as a powerful reminder that accountability can spark real progress. Amira's journey was more than a fight over a seat on a plane. It was a powerful story about standing up to prejudice, reclaiming dignity, and refusing to be invisible. Her experience taught that silence and compliance only allow injustice to persist. But speaking out, even when it's hard, can change lives. For all of us, Amira's story offers a vital lesson. Respect is not a privilege reserved for the powerful or wealthy. It is a right for every human being. When we witness unfairness, we must have the courage to act, whether by speaking up, supporting others, or challenging systems that harm people. In today's world, small acts of bravery accumulate into a larger movement toward equality and justice. Each of us can be a catalyst for change by refusing to accept discrimination in any form and by standing firmly with those who are marginalized. If Amira's story inspired you, remember that real change begins with you. Whether it's in your community, workplace, or daily interactions, your voice and actions matter. Together, we can create a world where no one is forced to give up their rightful place simply because of who they are. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more stories about courage, justice, and change, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your support fuels us to bring you powerful stories that matter. Stay strong, stay kind, and never stop fighting for what's right.